How can one effectively measure the corporate quality of any given employer organization? How do you dive in and discover, maybe uncover some of the mediocrity that might be hiding in plain sight? Or maybe some of the talent that is just ready for grooming and for leadership? Some of these things and more, such as the early indicators of mass turnover, we're going to discuss about today in the Corporate Quality Index Report, Summer 2021. Just in case you're new to the Corporate Quality Index, this is one of UpDoc's anonymous survey series where we ask the general population within our profession, within rehab therapy, to drop their responses based on certain queries on how their current, prior, or maybe declined to say employer might be or may not be doing well. The Corporate Quality Index has now grown to 10 index items, 10 questions that we ask the respondents to just rank their employer. And we wanted them to be as honest as possible. So it is anonymous, it is untracked, and it is data safe. We're going to break down each of these 10 index items as well as some of the early indicators that are suggesting that it has the power of predictive modeling, especially when it pertains to talent acquisition and retention, and when you might be just around the corner to some mass turnover event. There are also some index items that are highly correlated, suggesting perhaps that things are coming in pairs or in triplets, such as workplace culture and work-life balance, tolerance to mediocrity, and the mindset of ownership that might or might not be empowered in your employer organization. All these things come together to form a comprehensive analysis of how much quality or perhaps areas of improvement your organization might have. And this leads downstream to things like talent retention, human capital management and growth, revenue optimization, and cost containment. So let's go ahead and dive in with index item number 1, salary. So everybody's always interested in talking about salary, but unlike what we do for the Job Market Pulse, which is our open source data pool, salary norms, trends, and reports series, we didn't ask for the number. We asked for the recommendability of the employer organization based solely on the quality of the salary. And there's not much surprise here. For the most part, the salary is considered as an is what it is what it is, kind of could be a little bit better, maybe you could pay me a little bit more tomorrow type of ranking. And who's to be surprised by that? I think that's just the general aspects for most of our industry norms. Now, certainly there's a distribution. There are certain organization types that seem to rank higher than others, and some that seem to rank lower, and some of these were surprises. We'll be talking about who these respondents are because there is a distinct pattern. But we will move on straight to number 2, benefits. Benefits also ranked kind of in this whole, it is what it is. There's this kind of neutral satisfaction to a tolerated meh. This is the benefits package, it comes with the job. And there's not much wiggle room really for employer organizations to develop a better or more advantageous benefits packages because it affects the entire ecosystem. So unlike salary, where you can negotiate such numbers, benefits are usually a fixed aspect of the compensation package. And so with no surprise, it generally is what it is. But we will make notice that there seems to be a struggling segment, 2 of them in fact. First is the smaller organization, the 1 to 10 employee sized organization. Also is the 51 to 199 employee sized organizations. These 2 groupings, for some reason, seem to struggle in this area and in many others. There's a suspicion that the small size organization just doesn't have enough volume of people to be able to afford such benefits. And for the 51 to 199 size organizations, it's almost as if it is just too small, like not big enough yet, not 200 plus yet, to be able to enjoy economies of scale. Culture has long been held as kind of the standard for which talent acquisition and retention occurs. Now, acquisition is usually paired with salary, and we'll be discussing that later, but retention is keenly tied to culture. And this part is actually a little bit encouraging. We see that for most respondents, they are either in favor, they are neutral, or unfortunately, they're very unfavorable. But there doesn't seem to be such a span where it's kind of this randomized shoot. There are distinct bandwidths of confidence that the workforce has in our organization. This one's kind of a fun favorite of ours. And really, you can begin by asking this question: does the stress of work follow your employees home? How do they feel when they get an email or a text message from their superiors? Do their eyes dilate? Does their heart rate suddenly spike and their blood pressure is suddenly through the roof? Or is it something that they're looking forward to receive? These are good qualitative questions in giving context to the ranking in the work-life balance. And this is also where the CQI report really gets interesting, because it was here that we started to really notice linked and paired corollaries between the various indices, some which seem to just be hand in hand, others which look like they have predictive qualities. As it pertains to work-life balance, it really looks like work-life balance is a foundation of the prior index, workplace culture. You just can't have a good workplace culture if the stress of work follows you home. And there seems to be another interesting play here, where organizations of scale less than 20 locations seem to have the best balance in work life. There's also this interesting element too of the organizations of size. The smaller the organization, the better the work-life balance. And it seems to be fairly intuitive, but it's nice to see that there are bandwidths that we can now speak confidently on a data-driven level. This is where the news starts to dip down a little bit. It's a little negative, but there is a way to turn this around for your organization and for our profession and industry at large. Ownership mindset is really defined by the idea that the employer encourages the workforce to take ownership over their daily roles, responsibilities, and operational duties. That they are otherwise involved in the decision-making process. Not necessarily that they get to make the decisions themselves, but they have influence and at the very least input into the operational processes. Unfortunately for ownership mindset, this is one of the lowest scoring items of the corporate quality index, actually the second lowest. And that second lowest one is paired with the lowest scoring one at a highly tied level, which is item number 6. Item number 6 is actually phrased this way: does your organization effectively manage mediocrity? And so it's really kind of a play on words. If you have a high score, then you have a low tolerance to mediocrity. And unfortunately, it looks like these things are almost the same, kind of the same way that work-life balance is predicated or perhaps is a prerequisite for workplace culture. You can't have one without the other. And similarly, you can't be good at managing mediocrity as an organization if you don't instill the sense of ownership mindset in your workforce. So how low are we scoring as a profession? Well, for the respondents, over 70% felt that they couldn't recommend their employer organization based solely on the category of having a strong sense of ownership mindset for the workforce. And 74% of respondents felt they couldn't recommend their organization because that organization had a high tolerance to mediocrity. And when it comes to a commentary of healthcare companies, we literally have people's lives in our hands. And it's alarming to say the least that our workforce feels that our employer organizations don't have the effective tools or perhaps policies and procedures to weed out and performance up risks of mediocrity. Probably one of the most significant pieces in the corporate quality index is this revelation of item number 7, intention to stay. Intention to stay is directly correlated with talent retention overall, with no surprise. But it's asked in a very specific way. How likely is your workforce member who's adding their voice to the survey, how likely are they to stay within the next 12 months? Which gives you a little bit of a window of maybe recovering that at-risk employee. Now, before we dive into the numbers, it's interesting to note the distribution. And that's something that we talk in depth in the CQI report when you download it and read it for yourself, is that the averages are sometimes overshadowed by the skew of the distribution. There might be a whole bunch of low scores and a whole bunch of high scores, which makes the average somewhere in the middle and a little deceptive to what might be actually happening in your organization compared to the profession at large. And indeed, with intention to stay, there's unfortunate U-shaped distribution with a fair handful of people that are very happy where they are, they don't want to leave, and unfortunately, a bunch of people on the other side pretty much ready to quit their job yesterday. We'll discuss this in depth in the report, but the short notes are this. 55% of the workforce is basically ready to quit their job today. And only about 24% of the workforce feels very favorable about staying over the course of the next 12 months. Now, there's this predictive modeling thing that we've been mentioning throughout this video, and we will talk about this in depth in the report. And it's the idea that aspects of the corporate quality index items can tie to the next one in possibly a predictive way. Predictive modeling is always really interesting when it comes to business intelligence. It helps executives and mid-level and sometimes line-level managers make strong decisions based on data versus what their gut might say. And when paired together, usually you get the best results. And something interesting that we didn't expect to see was an additional relationship point with intention to stay. We already know from other report series through UpDoc that intention to stay is tied to workplace culture. If you have a good organizational corporate culture, you're gonna have a lot of people stay. If you have a bad one, a lot of people are gonna leave. One thing we didn't expect was this tie to corporate social responsibility. This is an index item that we added for this round of surveys, and we'll talk about this later, but there's a strong tie here, so strong that it's basically on par with workplace culture. Again, it's something that's a little bit surprising. When you talk about it out loud a little bit further, it kind of makes sense, but we'll dive into it when we do talk about the organization and how it is gauged by your workforce as a responsible corporate citizen. So we have 10 total corporate quality index items that were asked as surveys, and they are obviously algorithmically calculated and ranked to spit out a score. And this score is internally changing for us, but we report on it in its whole. So you get to see it in the report, including the named employers. Now, 8, 9, and 10 are the workforce's gauge of how the business is being run and how it relates to the consumer at large. So number 8 is if the workforce feels that your employer organization is worthy of being recommended as a choice provider of its respective goods and services. And the good news is really found here, that most of the workforce feels quite favorable about employer organizations and the work that they do, the products that they provide, and the services that are rendered. Now we're gonna skip item number 9 because that's the corporate social responsibility talk. We're gonna go to 10 as just a quick note. It's related to item number 8 that we just talked about is, can the workforce recommend their employer organization as a choice provider? Number 10 has a slightly different and subtle spin to it is, can the workforce recommend their employer organization as a place to receive ongoing or repeat purchases of services and goods and so on? And the reason we wanted to put this one here is because quite often workforce members will say, hell yeah, come on by. Like, think about a coffee shop, right? Like, oh yeah, come on, you can try our coffee. Well, what about coming as a regular for coffee every day? Oh, well, maybe go over there. Right? Like, if you're honest with yourself, that conversation can and will happen. And we wanted to see how often this was happening. It was happening a little bit less. It was actually quite positive. Again, majority of the workforce feels quite strongly favorable to their employer organizations as a place for ongoing services. So that's good news. All right, we're gonna close out the individual item indices with number 9, corporate social responsibility. Or maybe more accurately phrased is, can the workforce recommend the employer organization as a responsible corporate citizen? And this was really interesting. Corporate social responsibility, without diving too deep, has initially been seen with kind of mixed controversy in the business management world and has become more adopted as time and data has come on. It was initially seen as a little bit maybe fluffy, a little bit nebulous, but there's a lot of analysis now that's available, a lot of business literature that strongly suggests that this is something you should consider. And it doesn't necessarily mean that your company needs to become sociopolitically active overnight and head deep in. It means that your business practices needs to align with what the workforce considers to be socially responsible. And we have more good news to share in that most of the workforce feels favorably that their organization is indeed a responsible corporate citizen. But this is where the discussion got really interesting from an analysis standpoint, is when we ran correlative statistics on each index item and how they relate to the next one, the one that kept coming up, the common denominator that seemed a little bit predictive to strongly predictive of other index items was right here. Is the organization seen by its workforce as a responsible corporate citizen. It showed really strong ties to intention to stay, very strong ties to a workforce's gauge of its employer as a good place to receive repeat and ongoing purchases and services. And it also had quite a bit to deal with management of mediocrity as well as ownership mindset. It just seemed to be this tie right here. And it's a good time right now to also share that in this report, we broke down each index item, not only by the location number, but also by the size and scale of the organization, both as different distributions. So you can see for yourself, where do I line up? And it was really interesting to see that there were consistently leaders, primarily less than 20 locations, and the size of organizations that were 11 to 50 employees. For whatever reason, on the majority of index items, these two kind of side-by-side demographics did the best across the board. We talk about why this might be, also which data sets within the index items are perhaps a little bit young, and also which ones you can probably rely upon. Other interesting features of this report dives into the global scoring along with the averages and standard deviations, naturally, but also the honeymoon effect. Do employees rate their employers better or higher in current employment versus in past employment versus if they decline to stay? And the results are a little bit mixed and somewhat surprising. Now that the corporate quality index has grown a little bit, we have quite a bit of named employers. And as promised, we do name these employers and their entire scale and composite score. Some of these are merged because we feel very strongly about protecting individual respondents. During our pilot of the CQI, there were some respondents that had a little bit of fear and trepidation about being exposed. You know, if you work for a small practice in a small town, that practice is named and you're one of 3 employees and you're the more talkative one, I wonder who submitted this score, right? So we chose on certain ones to leave it be, some to merge, and others we have those data sets, and when the data set grows and more responses happen, we will add them in, but they are named there. There were almost 300 named listed. We merged it down to over 150, and we did include a top 20 score as well, with a couple pinches of salt in that some of these are single scoring ranks. Others are very obviously rated by vested individuals, like who believes in all 10s across the board. I know who you are, you know who you are, we know who you are. The law of large numbers will play out. And so it's just a call out just to make sure that that is discussed and regarded when you do see the report. Now, another note of positivity in this report is we discuss 3 concrete data-driven steps on how to empower excellence in your organization. And without going into the specifics of the steps, they are the following. Number 1, stop rewarding mediocrity. Number 2, consider corporate social responsibility as a key business tenet to your company. And finally, number 3, consider making workplace culture a true priority for 2021 and beyond. These 3 steps and some of the outlines that we make and things to keep in mind paired with the corporate quality index can really help organizations thrive through the remainder of the 2020s. Other features in this report you might be interested in is the talk about predicting turnover, as well as is there such a thing as an ideal size and scale to an organization, and what can companies do to optimize what they already have or optimize as they grow. To wrap this up, we at UpDoc really wanted to express humble gratitude to all of you that added your voice to the Corporate Quality Index. We understand that this is a thing of trust, and we hope that we are continually worthy of your trust as we release these data sets and these reports. So go ahead and download it, give it a read through. It's a big one, it's almost 50 pages. There's a lot of data to unpack. Tell us what you think. We always love hearing from you, and we really eagerly receive your feedback because we use such feedbacks to gauge future surveys, future reports, and also how to fine-tune our analysis. So thanks for joining us for the Corporate Quality Index. I'm Ben Fung with UpDoc, and I will see you at the next one.